What is crack-a-whacking, fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan VanVleet coming at you with another very quick intro. I'm going to be posting an episode that I did with Salman Ali of Red Nation Hoops, where we went into a deeper dive on the Rockets. We actually recorded it. It was for Red Nation Hoops, so go check them out. I'll include the link to his Substack and as well the YouTube channel in the podcast and YouTube description. We did talk about it before they went on their 3-game losing streak. Watched their game against the Warriors on Monday. I thought they put up a hell of a fight, really, considering they were on the second end of a back-to-back. We did talk about some of the micro stuff with them, but it was mostly big picture stuff. So I decided that I'm going to post it anyway. And they are, the Rockets, the Timberwolves, those are probably like the two most surprising teams in the league thus far when you're looking at maybe pleasant surprises. So I think it behooves us to, listen to someone like Salman, who covers them on a daily basis, really gives a lot of thought to them. And so I think you'll enjoy this episode. These are reminders before we get started. Please remember to subscribe wherever you're consuming us: YouTube, Spotify, Apple. Ratings and reviews on Apple help us a ton. If you've done all those things, please tell people about us. Help spread the word about the podcast so we continue to make the community grow. You can follow us on all the socials as well. Links are in the podcast and YouTube description. And finally, join our Discord. The link to that's in the podcast and YouTube description too. There's a lot of great conversations happening in there right now. We have a great community there too. And, Grant and I really do appreciate all of your support that you continue to show us on YouTube, across the audio version of the podcast, on the shorts that we've been posting, and the TikToks. So once again, and as always, thank you all. And I hope you enjoy this episode with Salman Ali of Red Nation Hoops about a deep dive into the short-term, but more importantly, the long-term outlook of the Houston Rockets.
What's up, guys? Welcome to this podcast. My name is Salman Ali at Salman Ali NBA on Twitter. Here, joined by Dan Favale of Bleacher Report. Dan, how you doing?
I am doing well, Salman. How are you doing now that you're covering a team that's apparently the best franchise in NBA history?
Yeah, I was just talking to you about this before we started recording. Like, people just only want to talk when the Rockets are like good or interesting. Like, no one ever wants to just say what's up or hello or happy birthday, right? Like, or
is your birthday?
No.
Oh.
I mean, but like, you can send me something if you know it's my birthday. Like, you know what? Send me something else. Like, hey, can you come on in 2 hours? Hey, can you or tomorrow are you free at X time? It's like why when the Rockets are good, or like, how about when they're not a story? How about, like, I can talk about basketball. We can talk about other stuff.
Like, now you know how I feel after Christmas, where it's like radio producers will remember that you exist. Or even just like after busy periods where it's like, oh, the trade deadline or the draft, the finals. There's always, you're inundated. And I try to be understanding because it's hard to convey tone in emails and text messages. And I understand that, like, producing sport, I mean, we both do it, but like, I try to be super courteous to my guests and like ask how they're doing. It's just, there's no preamble. It's just, and so I don't let it affect whose shows I go on, but yeah, I hear you on that.
Yeah. And I remember this summer, we're super off topic, but I don't care. So I remember this summer, like, there was a period, like, after I came back from vacation, where people suddenly realized that the Rockets had a ton of cap space. Like, they didn't realize it before the summer started. It's like, oh, Houston has how much money to spend? Oh, they're going after who? So the endless, right? It's just like people. I guess it's like, you don't know until it's time. But whatever the case, I'm happy to do it. But I'm glad that I get to do my own today. I'm glad I get to do my own show today. Dan, let me ask you this: on a scale of 1 to 10, how surprised are you by the Rockets so far?
Wow, that's not the first question I thought you were. I saw you going off, or listened to you, not go off, but you did the podcast you did. I can't remember who it was with, but 5 observations you each did on the Rockets season, and you called out Alperen Sengun doubters, and I thought you were just bringing me on to dump.
We're gonna get there. We're gonna get there.
I did, to be fair, much lower on him than you were, but I was at least like, saw the vision, just didn't think they would ever get there with him. But there's no defense. There's just, this team has shocked and awed me in so many different ways. And it's not even the ways that are unsustainable. Like, Dillon Brooks is not going to continue to hit threes like this. If he does, I'll be absolutely, my mind will melt. But the stuff that they've done defensively, some of the stuff like that they're doing with Alperen Sengun, how they're really able, like the attention that Fred VanVleet is able to utilize, even when he's not being able to finish that well inside the arc. This team, you watch them and there is a rhyme and reason to everything they're doing, and they look the part. There are numbers that you look at and you know some of those are going to curtail. They've gotten a little bit lucky on opponent 3-point shooting, as like, you know, with just one of those popular in-season ones, but they look like they're actually really good. And this, mind you, is with Jalen Green only just started turning a corner after a pretty bad start from him. And so to be in this position is just sort of, it's sort of wild.
No, yeah, and for sure. And like that was actually going to be, by the way, I stole that question from a podcast I was on earlier today. I was like, oh, that's a great question. I'm going to use that with Dan today. How surprised are you? Okay, I'm going to do that. But like, this does lead into my next question, which is like how real their record is. And I kind of wrote about this today, which is like, I don't want to, you know, throw a bunch of cold water on the Rockets fans. Like, be as happy as you guys want to be, right? Like the Rockets are much more competitive this year. They're a better basketball team than they were last year. There's no doubt about it, right? That's like, no, you're not going to find anybody that's going to dispute that. But they have played 7 out of their first 9 games at home. They have played a Charlotte team without Miles Bridges, a Kings team without De'Aaron Fox twice. They played the Lakers without Anthony Davis. They played the Nuggets without Jamal Murray, right? Like
that's a win. That's still a caps lock. Beating the Nuggets.
It is a big win. It is a big win. And the Kings win. It's not like they just won that game. They demolished the Sacramento Kings. Like there is a rocket-sized crater in Sacramento right now because what the Rockets did to them was embarrassing. The game was over by halftime twice. That's how decisive those victories were. So I'm not here to pour a bunch of cold water on it. I'm just saying that there is some real stuff that we need to acknowledge is going to go back to normal. Like their opponents are shooting like 33% from 3 on them. That's like 2nd in the NBA. They're shooting like 37% from 3. That's 9th in the NBA, right? Like
that's
Dillon
not
Brooks.
Like, 9th is not
crazy. Yeah. It's not crazy, but like more specifically, like Dillon Brooks is shooting like 50% from 3, right?
Yeah, I mean,
Jae'Sean Tate is shooting like 50% from 3. I think Tari Eason's shooting like 42%. Like Jalen Green shooting 40%. Like a lot of these percentages are insane, right? Like some of these are going to come back home a little bit. Jalen, maybe not as much. Like maybe that goes from 40 to maybe 37. But like Dillon is not going to shoot 50% from 3. That's not going to happen. All right, just not going to happen. We're due for a cold stretch there. We're due for a cold stretch with Jae'Sean Tate. But more specifically, like they're gonna get on the road here pretty soon. And they're going to test their mettle against some other teams. And I am excited to see what happens. But listen, after that Denver Nuggets game, like you're not going to get an argument from me about whether or not they're better. They're better. There's something serious going on here. As far as like how real their record is, we can get into that at a later time. I think it's fine to just enjoy this if you're a fan.
Yeah, I mean, even you, someone who has been incredibly high on Alperen Sengun, would you come in to this season and said there's going to be games early on in the year where he just thoroughly outplays Domas Sabonis? That's not something that I think you could have reasonably predicted, even if you thought he had that ceiling, because would he have the type of agency that he's actually gotten on the offensive end this year?
That's what it is. Yeah.
I think that's
100% what it is, right? It's like, it's not that I didn't trust in Sengun. It's like I didn't trust in the Rockets, right? Like the ability for them to gauge Sengun as a talent, right? Like I think they've so mishandled him up until this point. And Ime comes in and he says off the bat in his press conference, like, listen, all roles are up for grabs. All these starting spots are up for grabs. All usage, everything's up for grabs. Like you guys have to come and earn it, and you're going to get it by how you play on the floor. And it's like that rang a little hollow for me, right? Because they did go after Brook Lopez. I'm like, you're really going to give this guy a fair shake, right? And then they start the season, and after those first 3 games where they lost those first 3 games. I'm like, we're not debating this anymore. Like the best player on the team is Alperen Sengun. I did a podcast after they went 0-3. I'm like, I don't care what happens from here on out until the Rockets acknowledge that fact. They're going to keep losing games. They're going to keep losing games. It's so obvious at this point. Like those first 3 games, the only moments that they were good were when Sengun had the ball, right? It's like until they lean into that, you're going to keep getting similar results to this. And they leaned into it. Like that's good coaching. That's adjusting to your roster on the fly. Like I think, this organization's made some mistakes, right? Like in terms of how they've handled him, right? Mm-hmm. But like this is also how they're handling him, right? Like this is also their doing. The hiring Ime and Fred VanVleet, by the way, probably the biggest reason Sengun's having the season that he's having, because he comes in with like he's a point guard, and he plays very much like Chris Paul. Like when he sees something is working, he's gonna keep going and going and going to it. He doesn't care who it is, where it's coming from. He's gonna keep doing it. And when he saw that Sengun was producing at the rate that he was producing, he kept running pick and roll and dribble handoff and cuts everything he could with Sengun. And the rest of the Rockets just kind of followed along, like followed his lead. Like, okay, this is our guy. We're just gonna have to rally around him and run the entire offense through him. And that's the Rockets deserve some credit for that, man. Like I think they do. They really do deserve some credit for bringing in guys that would identify Sengun.
Yeah, I mean, and also I think it was easy. He's gotten a little bit better, but like Fred VanVleet shooting like 33 or 35% on drives still. The attention though that he commands and the organization that you're able to just kind of foment off of that is so huge for what the Rockets are doing too. Like I would argue his three, and look, the relative to the difficulty on his threes, his 3-point percentage is fine. Hovering right around league average. But I would argue that just the attention that he's drawing is probably going to hurt some of his efficiency stats, but it's not just Sengun. It's like everyone who's on the floor with him kind of just benefits from that. And then even having the 3-point percentage isn't going to stick, but to have 2 guys on the court at the same time and Dillon Brooks and Fred VanVleet, like being able to defend, that's been a huge part of this team too. I also think it's been a big reason why like Alperen Sengun has looked probably the best he's ever looked defensively for this team. And so I am very curious to see how it sort of holds up. You've pointed out the schedule concerns. We've talked about some of the numbers that are going there, but when you look at how many difference makers are just in a vacuum on this roster now, and that the Rockets are kind of discovering like, oh, how we can use Sengun. And it's not, I've always wondered if part of the problem was, wondered if this could be a limitation of his, but 2, was it a limitation of the Rockets' thought process behind him? Are you trying to use him in too specific of a way to where I think when you look at, I don't want to keep bringing it back to Sabonis, but you look at some of these other bigs that you can run offense through who are not Jokic. They have to be, it's like, oh, like we need to create separation for them, or there needs to be like some sort of dribble handoff action, or the ball needs to get to the post, or they need to be using the pick and pop, or they need to roll. Sengun can do basically everything. And it's just like he can jumpstart the offense on the run from a standstill, half court transition. And I do think, this is anecdotally because I haven't looked up numbers on this, his heightened aggression as kind of like a scorer when he does have his, like when he gets near the basket. I do know he's shooting like 60% on like hook shots or whatever it is. Like having that where it doesn't feel like he's actively looking to make these risky passes every time he gets the ball, that's still ingrained into him, but he feels like more of a threat as a scorer. Not just off the plays where he's finishing. It's like the from scratch scoring feels like it's at an all-time high for him. That has opened up a ton of other things. And my biggest concern with the Rockets start actually was, well, is Jalen Green going to kind of figure out how to adapt and adjust to this? And I think in recent games, you can speak to this more than I can, it feels like he has found more of that happy medium.
Yeah, I see. My thing with Jalen, I guess we can talk about this for a second before we get back to Sengun. People went into this year with kind of ridiculous expectations for him, right? Third year leap. I am tired of that phrase. That phrase holds very little with me. When you look at like one and done prospects, specifically of Jalen's mold, Zach LaVine, Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, like whoever you want to, like those types of shooting guard prospects don't typically have third year leaps. Like they have 4th, 5th, 6th year leaps. right? It takes them a little bit longer. If you're not a high-level processor coming into the NBA, it just takes some time for you to get used to the NBA game, right? Like Jalen is a great example of this. It's going to take some time. Jabari, it's going to take some time. But if you look at the high-level processor, it doesn't usually take that. Chris Paul, Luka Doncic, Magic Johnson, LeBron James, like it does. If you're like a high thinker of basketball, the game is not as fast for you, right? With Jalen, the game is still in the process of slowing down. And I think once you get to next season, that's when I'm expecting the leap. I think he's gonna get better this year. I think some of his numbers are gonna go up. But in terms of that capital L leap into like stardom, I'm expecting that more next year, right? I think that's kind of the year to look for it. And this idea that you can't play these two like together and they can't be awesome together. Like, first of all, their games don't conflict with each other. They complement each other. Like people on Rockets Twitter have been trying to pit these two against each other. And it's like, why can't you just have both? Like they're like Sengun is great at finding guys off the ball. And Green, guess what? Great off the ball, right? You saw him in the G League, was constantly moving off the ball, right? That's one of his strengths. So why not use it? And Jalen's getting better as a pick and roll operator, right? Sengun is getting better as a roller and a short roll passer. And all that stuff is complementary to Sengun learning how to be a pick and roll ball handler. So like these guys are going to play a ton of minutes together as the years go on. Right now, the Rockets are doing this thing where Jalen's kind of going out there by himself for long stretches. And I kind of want to see more of them together. But like eventually they're going to get to a point where they're playing a ton of minutes together. And I don't know why you can't have, like, why does it have to be a one or the other thing? I guess a lot of people had this idea that Jalen's going to be the guy. So they were threatened by this idea of Sengun being the guy, right? And it's like, you can still be you can still be a guy, right? You can still be a guy. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. And I actually was going to ask you, does that factor into why they're staggering them the way they do? Because the thing I've noticed is that they feel like they kind of tether Fred VanVleet and Alperen Sengun at the hip, where it's like you haven't seen a lot of Fred VanVleet without Alperen Sengun, but you've seen more of, are they viewing that as they think that's the best way to build a roster? Is it, oh, we want to make sure that Jalen Green is going to have as much license over the offense as more of a sort of featured option, rather than, as you mentioned, like trying to get him to play off Sengun more, which, by the way, if you go back and look at like game 1 or 2 of this team, I bet, to now game whatever they're in, the games against the game against the Nuggets, how much more in tune the players around Sengun are just moving off of him too. That's a huge difference that I wouldn't expect to go anywhere. But I am curious as to why does it feel like, unless you disagree, but it feels like they've kind of tethered FEV to Sengun more than Jalen Green.
No, I have noticed that, and it's not. It was something that I was kind of raising my eyebrow at. I was like, why aren't these guys staggering, right? More like why are you taking both of them off the floor at the same time when they're like your two best facilitators? And I kind of went back to Ime Udoka's for comments at media day and training camp. It's like they want Jalen to be a more complete player, right? And when they said that, they were alluding to two things: his defense and his passing, his playmaking. Like they knew they knew he could score, right? They knew, like, no one ever doubted Jalen's ability to score. Even coming out of the draft, I never doubted that. My doubts with him, like the reason I had Mobley over him, it's like, I'm not sure about this guy as a pick and roll operator. I'm not sure about this guy as a defensive player, right? And my guess is that they're giving him these long reps by himself so he can develop as a pick and roll operator, so he can develop as a ball handler and a threat like on that kind of level. That's theory number one. Theory number two is just VanVleet and Sengun are just so good with each other. It's just hard to separate the two, right? They play really good off of each other.
Yeah, it's sort of like the Jamal Murray, Nikola Jokic conundrum, where you just want to have those two on the court together as much as possible. So, and I think, look, it could be beneficial to just Green's development to, have those stagger it like that. But I think when you look at the long-term viability of this team, as good as and much of a breath of fresh air as Fred VanVleet has been, Jalen Green and Sengun are 1 and 2. Sengun is 1, Jalen Green is 2 now. And it's like they're the most important players. So you would like them to develop sort of a chemistry together. It's also probably, though, when you separate them, it's easier to insulate both defensively, and so there has to be an element of that to it. But man, I'm not
you know what it
gonna
reminds me of? Oh, go ahead. I don't
no,
want
go
to cut
ahead.
you off. Yeah, so you know what it reminds me of? Like, do you remember those first few years where Devin Booker was like by himself without a Chris Paul there, and he kind of had to get those reps as a playmaker by himself, like out of necessity,
Mhm.
right? Like it's almost like the Rockets are trying to do that with like the playmaker already on the roster. It's like, oh, we just got to separate the playmaker from him, right? Get all the playmakers off the floor, get him by himself, right? So he can like, so he has no crutch, right? So he has to learn this stuff by himself. That's kind of like what goes through my head when I watch this. I'm like, is that kind of what they're doing? I don't. These are theories.
They're
Right?
winning those minutes, by the way, too, which is just sort of wild. The Green with no Sengun
I didn't know
minutes.
that. Yeah. Okay.
So there are plus like 5 or plus 4 points per 100 possessions with an above average offensive rating. And so again, it's early, but I would have, when I was looking at that, I was expecting it to be not necessarily a disaster, but like, and even just the way that the offense is played. And I know a lot of those minutes you've had, I think this speaks to like sometimes, yeah, very rarely Fred VanVleet has been on the court in those stints. And so that's obviously going to help. But like Aaron Holiday is giving them some steadiness in certain stretches. But I was surprised to see like they're not turning the ball over like a crap ton, like during those stretches either. And so maybe that's proof of growth from Green. Maybe it's more about, okay, if you're going to play him with Jabari and Tate and Landale, okay, like you have guys that are just going to be sound and rock solid defensively. And so you're allowing your defense to get set with those guys. And if you're just scoring enough because Jalen Green's on the floor, I was just surprised that those minutes were as productive as they were. I don't know that I've seen Jalen Green to me make any of these like mega strides as a playmaker, but it has to be nothing if not encouraging that when you're going to separate him from Sengun, that you've now won these minutes through the first, why do I keep forgetting how many games we're in? We're 9 games into their season.
Yeah, and we'll see how those minutes go. And like I think it's obviously going to look better towards the end of the season than it will, at the beginning right now. But I do hope that they get to a point where there's a healthy medium there, right? He's not just playing all by himself. Like I want to see him with more Sengun. And VanVleet kind of off the floor, actually, frankly. I want to see them play off of each other a little bit more. And Sengun not have that crutch of VanVleet. I want to see him out there with Jalen by himself. And like those guys actually like each other a lot. They like playing with each other a lot. You see that. So there's no reason why it can't work, right? Like that's why, like, when I would see people just being like in one camp or the other, it's like, it doesn't have to be that way.
I honestly didn't know that was a thing.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, I never viewed, I guess, one, as someone who didn't think that Alperen Sengun was this franchise cornerstone. And look, by the way, the Rockets are at least partially to blame for that I was not more exposed to like Alperen Sengun as the featured hub. So I'm going to blame Houston for that and just deflect criticism for doubting Sengun during the first couple seasons of his career. I just never viewed Jalen Green specifically as it was a player that you couldn't because there was even some rumblings where it's like, yeah, I didn't want to see him play with James Harden. We disagreed on that a little bit, but like the Fred VanVleet stuff with him coming in, like it just I never viewed Jalen Green as someone who couldn't operate as some sort of like a running mate to another ball dominant, or not even ball dominant, but just like featured weapon or two. And I'm surprised that people framed the Sengun Green discussion. And I would have been, look, frankly, I feel like I would have been a little bit more worried about the Green Amen Thompson, like long term, because what does Amen Thompson do? Like, how does he sort of develop away from the ball? Does that mean that he needs to have it too much in his hands to where then that's infringing upon what Jalen Green does? Whereas Alperen Sengun and Fred VanVleet are both, if you don't want to say excellent for Sengun, just like they're good and serviceable off ball players.
Yeah, and it's not so much that people didn't think they could play with each other. It's more so like there is a nastiness there from like the Jalen Green folks they're like towards Sengun. Like there was like a dismissive attitude there. It's like, no, it's like Green's the guy. Green's the guy. Like, what are you guys even talking about with this fucking clown, right? Like that was kind of like the attitude there, right? Like, and people are listening this and they're gonna dispute it. Like, shut up. Like, that was there. Like, people on Rockets Twitter were definitely like this, right? And so, yeah, that was it was more so like a dismissiveness there. And like, even the Sengun folks, sometimes they felt like they had to like become like anti-Green. It's like, I never got to that point. All right, I was like more of like I think Sengun's better, but I think these guys play well off of each other. I think their games in theory at their highest levels fit next to each other really well. So I think they should be together. But yeah, I don't know. It's just fun to me to watch Sengun just like freeze defenses. Like it's not even like just like that he's a great scorer. It's that his passing is like the defenses don't know what to do. Cause like he starts off the game just like facilitating like crazy, right? And it's like, okay, so defense is when he gets the ball, everyone runs home to the shooters. And there's like almost an overreaction sometimes. Like there was a play when they were playing, I think it was the Warriors. No, it wasn't the Warriors. It was the Kings. It was the Kings. They were playing the Kings, and Harrison Barnes was guarding Sengun. And Sengun got the ball in that mid-post area, and there was an open three-point shooter, but Harrison Barnes still had the Sengun assignment. So he just ran to the open shooter, and Sengun had an open dunk. Like he's just freezing these guys. People don't know. Like by that time that third quarter comes, he's like paralyzed you into like, okay, so we have to close out hard. We can't then you forget like, oh, he can score too, right? He can score too. So he's going to beat you both ways. I don't know, like that was always my vision with him, right? As an offensive player, he always felt very complete to me, other than three-point shooting. That's still a developing thing. But like that, most areas of his game, he just excelled at. And like, that's kind of why I always thought this is like the most complete offensive player on the team. Now, I remember when we were doing our prospect rankings, right? You start off.
Oh no, where did I put him? I don't even remember.
I remember. I went back and looked at it because of this podcast today. You said that I wasn't going to do it, and I told you so, and you were kind of right. Like I'm not going to do that for the most part, but like I do want to say this. I went back and I looked at like when I was going through my rankings, and I said Jalen Green is my second best prospect on the Rockets. You started laughing like hysterically, like because you knew what that meant because I had run through everybody but Sengun, right? And you're like, oh, so he's gonna go Sengun number one, right? And I went back and I looked at your list, and you had I can't remember who you had 1 through 3, but it was their top picks, right? So it was Jalen, Amen, and Jabari in some order, the top 3, and then you had Sengun at number 4. So I guess my question to you is, if you were to revise that ranking, is Sengun still 4?
No, I mean that's a miss. Having him, so I will say, and I try to own my misses. The listeners of Hardwood Knocks will know this. I don't want to defend myself too much. I do feel like the Jabari Smith one is the only ranking that feels inexplicable based off the time right now, because we haven't seen enough of Amen. It's just, why would I even go with someone who doesn't have that NBA sample size? It's Alperen Sengun. Like this is, and I'm not going to pretend to have been ahead on this or earlier on time. I'm late on this, but he is like, this is someone you can build an entire direction around. And it's just, he's doing so many different things offensively. So no, he would not be number 4 on my list. I would be curious, like, where would Rockets fans have had him? Unlike Jalen Green would have been, I'm assuming, 1 for the vast majority of people.
He would have been. Yeah. That's where he would have been. He would have been number 2. He would have been number 2 or 3. I think maybe some folks would have had Jabari or Amen, but like once you did the polls or whatever, he would have probably been number 2, right? Like more people would have a number 2 than anybody else, right? And I think listen, I'm not here to just say I told you so to people.
No, do it. First of all, do it.
It's over, right? Like there's nothing left to say, right? Like it's like, well, what is there left to talk about, right? Now I want to talk big picture now. So when Morey was here, the Rockets were kind of like one of the more respected franchises in all of basketball, right? Because they were forward thinking and they were sharp as a front office. And I know it's only been 9 games, but this front office has been here for almost 3 years, right? And my question to you is, have they regained some of that respect in your eyes?
Yeah, I mean, I think they gained a lot of it back, I think, for me, with the offseason that they had, where I wasn't a fan, I wasn't advocating for Dillon Brooks, but I loved the Fred VanVleet acquisition. And it felt like, look, we're trying to get better without infringing upon development or necessarily accelerating our timeline too much. And I think the big thing here is I don't know what they entered this season thinking the pecking order was going to look like. But as you mentioned at the top, to kind of watch the first game, maybe the first couple games, and decide there's going to be a wholesale shift in how this offense is run and who's the most important. That, like, making those adjustments, we make fun of, I think people made fun of Adrian Griffin for saying that he had moved Brook Lopez out of drop, and then the players came to him and said they wanted him back in more, so he did it. When you look at information, when you're getting information, when you're getting feedback on the court or from your players and you react to it, that's something that deserves to be commended. And look, the other thing I'll say is, no, I was pretty vocal on my podcast that I thought the Grizzlies scapegoated Dillon Brooks. That was just like, I was not a Dillon Brooks guy. I want to make that clear. I thought he was maybe the single most damaging offensive player in the league. But the way that they kind of were just like, oh, we're getting rid of him, that I was vocal about. But I did not love the signing in Houston. Then he comes in and he is playing so differently. That's another way that you're going to regain respect, because he's cut his pull-up jumpers by like 2/3. He took like 6 last year per game. He's down to under 2 this year or whatever it is. And maybe it's because he's gotten paid. Maybe it's because there's that relationship with Ime Udoka, but like they have changed the way that Dillon Brooks is functioning on offense overnight. And it's probably because the Grizzlies, I think, needed him to do more than the Rockets have ever done. But now they've proven that Dillon Brooks can exist. No, he won't shoot 55+% from three forever, but he can exist in kind of this smaller, compact, complementary offensive role. So that's another kind of feather in the Rockets' cap. And you recognized the value in Alperen Sengun when you went out and got him on draft night. That counts. I think Jalen Green is still, I'm very excited about the long term of Jalen Green. When you kind of look at how when him and Sengun are playing together and he can get out and fan out on the wing around him in transition, you said they like playing together. I look at it and I'm just like, okay, he knows how to play around Sengun, and like that's someone that he's okay playing off of. And so the fact that if he actively likes it, not just understands it, that's going to be huge. I will admit, I still can't get a great feel for Jabari Smith Jr., who I've been up and down on all over the place. But like that was, when you look at where they picked, like that was just the pick. That was the only, like they weren't going to make a different pick. And there's a lot of, I still think, defensive malleability there that's yet to be sort of tapped. I'm very interested in what his offensive role looks like on this team long term. But yeah, I specifically with the additions that they've made, some of the developments and the way that it's panning out on the floor. Right? I mean, Tari Eason's just a development. He comes back and it's just, oh, like this guy's just, he's only shooting like 33% on twos, but he's knocking down all of his threes, basically. Even just like, I'm not trying to go too far in the weeds, but I can't remember which game it was in garbage time, like having Jonathan Williams come in and like that guy's like, oh, that's like kind of interesting when you're looking at just like his 0 to 60 speed in the half court. I think they have regained some of that trust. And I think I don't know if there's like another level that they still need to prove it. I am curious to see how they react to this success if it sustains, though. Like, is this going to be a team that's going to rush to consolidate, or will they take kind of the more gradual Oklahoma City approach, even though they're not built around just homegrown players now that Dillon Brooks and Fred VanVleet are there? Do they kind of just let this play out and see where they sort of lay throughout the course of the season? It's a ridiculous thing to think about probably 9 games into the season, but this success is, you mentioned all the caveats at the top, like they beat the Nuggets. Like they beat the Nuggets. Like that's like with Jokic on the court, I don't care. Like that's a real thing.
Yeah, I mean it's a really, really compelling start to the season. And real quick on Dillon Brooks, like I wrote before the season, like I was like the one guy in Houston media defending that contract. Like everybody was fervently against it, right? Like, and the reason I was like okay with it, I wasn't like saying it was great. I thought it was fine. And the reason I thought it was fine is because I went back and I looked at what Ime Udoka did with Marcus Smart. Because people don't remember Marcus Smart pre Ime Udoka. The guy was a chucker, especially with the pull-up threes specifically. Udoka comes in.
He's doing it again this season, by the way, out of necessity, and he's injured now, so I don't mean to speak ill of the injured, but
right, ill of the injured. Okay, all right, no, so like Udoka comes in and he halves Marcus Smart's pull-up threes. Like he takes half as much pull-up threes per game under Udoka, and it's like that's a drastic, shift, man. Like the fact that he had that kind of an impact on that kind of a player, it's like I was optimistic that he could have a similar impact on Dillon Brooks, and I was optimistic when you looked at, his shot diet, that I didn't think he was that bad of a shooter. I just think he took the wrong shots. Right? I just thought he took the wrong shots. I thought he was a fine catch and shoot player. I just thought he didn't take that many catch and shoots, and I thought a coach that could get through to him would make him fine, would make him not a damaging offensive player. And defensively, we all know what he is. So, and you looked at where the salary cap was headed. Like I kind of thought that, this is going to be fine by year 2 or 3 of this contract. Like this is going to be a decent deal. I don't think, and it's a declining deal too, right? So it's like you got both of those things going in your favor. So, I did that with Dillon Brooks. Like I'm not going to pretend like I saw this, right? Like he's taking like 7 shot attempts per game or something, or 9 or something low, right? Something really low, not double digits.
So 1.9 pull-up jumpers per game, which is he was at 5.8 last year, I think.
No, yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, that is crazy, and that's probably where his regression is going to come. Is he's going to start taking more pull-up jumpers, and that's gonna, because he's confident now, right? He's making his threes. He's going to start taking pull-up jumpers, and then that's where the regression comes, right? But yeah, I think I thought that was a solid signing. And you also Jae'Sean Tate, by the way, another guy they found off the scrap heap, right? Like this is a guy they found in Australia, right? And was by all accounts like a really heady offensive talent, actually, right? Like that's what he was doing in Australia. He was leading I think it was the Sydney Kings. I can't remember which team it was. He was leading their offense, right? And he comes in. The Rockets recognize the kind of defensive potential he has, and he starts in preseason game number 1 under Steven Silas, which is like, it's a new coach is always going to favor vets, and for someone to come in like that and just grab a starting spot was super impressive, and I thought he was awesome. So they've regained some of that with me too. I'm not sure if I'm where I was with Morey, right? Because I still think Morey's one of the best general managers in basketball, maybe in sports, right? Like I think he's really, really good at his job. Or maybe we disagree there. I think he's awesome, right? But Rafael's, I think he's pretty good, right? Like, so I want to get this off my chest because I'm seeing a lot of this sentiment on Twitter, and as frustrating as some of his decisions have been, you just can't take away credit from Rafael Stone for putting this team together. You just can't. Nobody in this Rockets media space was a bigger proponent of Sengun than I was, right? Like, you're not going to find it. Like, before he played his first NBA game, I had multiple articles up about him. Like, I did a profile about him.
So you were smitten from day one.
I was a big guy. I was a big Sengun guy.
Take the victory lap then. Just take it.
No, so like, I say that to say I understand more than anyone the frustration that folks have with the organization for kind of undercutting him at seemingly every turn, right? But Stone did trade for the guy. As you said, he traded for the guy. He gave up 2 first-rounders. I don't care if it was his idea or not. And frankly, I don't know. And I'm not going to pretend like I do, like some people out there. No one knows whose idea it was to take Sengun. Most of the stuff that's out there is pure speculation. And even if it wasn't his idea, let's just say for a second, it wasn't his idea. Well, he had the presence of mind to act on that idea, right? He had the presence of mind to execute on it, right? Like the same thing with the Fred VanVleet over James Harden thing, right? Like he may have preferred James Harden, but he took Ime Udoka's idea of going after VanVleet, right? When you listen to smart people, that says a lot about you.
Yeah.
Right? It just does. You don't get to take this stuff away from him. He certainly hasn't been perfect, but for the most part, in my opinion, I think he's done a pretty good job of putting this core together. And I don't want to hear this bullshit about how Stone was this naive bystander through all the good decisions, while also being the driving force behind all their ill-advised decisions. Like, you can't have it both ways. You can't. Like, he's the GM. Everything the organization does from a basketball ops perspective goes on his resume. Like the same thing with the Morey Westbrook trade. Like, Morey has to own that. That goes on his resume. He even went on the record with that on his resume. I don't care where it came from. That goes on. That's on him, right? You are ultimately responsible for the decisions you make, And that narrative just kind of bothered me. I'm sorry. That wasn't more so a question. I just need to get that off my chest.
Well, there's like, you can't be perfect. And I feel like people, let's look at Denver with Michael Malone as their head coach, where he got unprecedented time. And there were excuses to explain away their struggles, injuries, mostly things that happen to them. But you're ridiculed if you stick with one thing for too long, rather than being celebrated if you see something's not working. And even if it takes you too long to get away from it, Steven Silas, for example, or even if it takes you too long to get to Alperen Sengun, the fact that you still ended up here, it's not something everyone could have done. And I think what really does help Stone is not all of this stuff is just sort of revelatory. Where the Sengun thing, yes, it was maddening from your perspective to not see them focus on him more until now. But it's not really a coincidence that you finally make the coaching change and then this gets unearthed. To my point, though, that was a weird detour there. Tari, Eason, Jae'Sean, Tate, all these guys were just they were already fines. And even just Jalen Green is, you can quibble over well, what is his ceiling going to be? That's going to be a legitimate NBA player. And so even though if you haven't the process of what was unfolding on the court, a lot of the stuff that was happening when you're looking at how their roster was built, setting themselves up for the cap space that they had this past summer, when it's a unique weapon in the sense that free agency is not what it used to be. But if you have money to throw around and are willing to spend it, look at what you can do. He was probably just using them as leverage, but okay, you didn't want to see him come in and take minutes away from Alperen Sengun, but Brook Lopez was talking to you. That got you into a conversation that you otherwise wouldn't have been. Were you used as a stalking horse? I don't know. Do you want to troll Rafael Stone and co because they had Sengun and they were still looking at Lopez? Lopez is one of the best rim protectors of the decade. And so I understand from a theory perspective what they were trying to do. So yeah, it's just interesting how, this comes back to people remember your misses more than your hits. And so it's just easier to focus on. And I think that is probably a big reason why. And a lot of the times it's sort of superstar syndrome, where it's, if player X loses, it's, oh, did they not have enough help? And if they win, it's oh, they were the driving force. It's that type of analysis. Not everyone follows it, but you're in the quest to simplify things down or make everything binary. And then I think we live in a world, as I already mentioned, where it's so much easier to, one, maybe not forgive the misses, but you're going to accentuate and spotlight the failures and just kind of forget about what you were right about. Whereas, look, if you came, no one's going to remember that you were early on Sengun. But if he had kind of flamed out of the league, everyone would remember that you were going to the hill for this guy. It's so last year I picked the Nuggets to win the title in the preseason and no one else was doing that. I was told I was crazy. It wasn't no one remembers that I picked the Nuggets, but if they flamed out in the first round, everyone would have remembered that I picked the Nuggets to win the title.
Yeah. And I'm that asshole that's going to remind you all the time, right?
Good. I couldn't do it. I can't. I took one victory lap and it just wasn't, it was a tweet. It just wasn't really that satisfying for me, but you absolutely should, especially on this, where it's it wasn't just that people weren't watching the Rockets enough. It was that the Rockets didn't even seem like they were in tune with who they had.
Yeah. I remember I wrote, this was midway through his first season, right? I wrote this article about how they should trade Christian Wood at some point and just kind of go with this guy, right? This should be their building block. This kind of looks like a building block piece here. I feel like more people should pay attention to this. And I got destroyed in the comments of that tweet, where I tweeted the article where I was people were just not ready to just trade Christian Wood, which is I didn't understand it. I was to me at that point, it was obvious that Christian Wood had to go. Do you remember that? We don't have to go too far. I remember that one time I proposed trading Christian Wood for 3 first-round picks, and it was a 99% no. From Ryan.
I know this is a localized podcast, and I have all the respect in the world for team-specific pods, but the way that we're able to curate our content to only hear what we want to hear is broken fandom in so many ways. To where it's you think Christian Wood as a fan is 3 first-round picks isn't enough. That is just that's a weird silo to live in, because Zach LaVine's going to get traded. I don't even know if he's going to get 3 first-round picks.
And in fairness, it was Christian Wood and PJ Tucker, right? I threw PJ Tucker in the trade, right? But still, That's not enough. Like 3 first rounders, like that, I don't know. Whatever the case. Um, I I say that to say like we're here now, and you said earlier in the podcast that you think that Sengun can kind of be your driver moving forward. Now, when you say driver, what do you mean?
Like that is your pole star, where it's
Okay, so can be the best player on a championship team. Like, do you see that potential?
I would say yes. There's still some defensive concerns I have, and like they have not necessarily when they've opponents have gotten to the rim, they have not held up too well. But I also see that he is better. I personally think that he's been better defensively, and I think part of that is his role's been or not simplified, but he's not as exposed enough when you look at what they have going on up top, where it's Jae'Sean Tate is healthy. You have Fred VanVleet, you have Dillon Brooks, Amen Thompson before he gets injured. And so if you can surround him with the right personnel, can you look like, could it be more of an equitable split where it's like that he has a 1B or something, but he can absolutely be the best offensive player on a championship team. I think that is what we're discovering. When you look at, it's not just the numbers he's putting up right now. I keep coming back to the methods by which they're coming, which is in this comprehensive package where it's just so many different ways that he's able to punish you. And I believe, and I would probably include myself in this, we might just be more open to now recognizing that and saying, yeah, this can be someone who is, it's still too early in the sense that this is year 3 for him. And so like, let's kind of pump the brakes and see. But when you look at the outlines of what he can do, because now Jokic has won a title where a lot of people kind of framed it this way as he can't be the best player on a championship team. I do think Sengun's a different player. He's not anywhere near the shooter that Nikola Jokic is when you look at kind of the floater and the fadeaways and just even the 3-pointer that Nikola Jokic has. But the passing, the vision, the different ways he's able to score inside the arc once he gets moving downhill. I look at him, and if I don't want to, the best player on a championship team is so tough because that's like 10 players in the league. I'll frame it this way. He is good enough to me to direct everything you do from here on until proven otherwise, to where it's when you're looking, if we're moving past the point where they're going to be drafting super high, you're looking for guys that can come in, fit with him, cover up for his weaknesses, optimize his strengths. I think he is the lens through which you look like through your future. And it's, again, because Jalen Green is there, it feels like it could be more of an equity. Like if you view those guys as the two, but when it comes down to it in Denver, there's that clear separation between Jokic and Murray. I don't think the gap will ultimately be as big between Sengun and Green. I'm that high on Green, and Jokic is one of the best players of all time. And so to predict that for Sengun is wild. But I think that's the best way to put it, is like you have found, until proven otherwise, like this is your North Star.
Yeah, it's like I think he can be like we've passed the point where this thing was always a spectrum, right? With Sengun, like it was like starting center, star, like the Sabonis tier of all-star, and then the high end was. This
is going to anger a lot of people. His ceiling is way higher than Domas Sabonis's.
No, yeah, I'm saying that was like the middle, right? Like in the end of that spectrum was like Jokic, right? Which is like, people were shy to say it, but we got to acknowledge like that's the ceiling, right? That's like it has to be there. So I think he's somewhere between Sabonis and Jokic now, right? Which is like, there's like Pau Gasol's there. I would say Pau Gasol's kind of in that middle of Jokic. Yeah, of Jokic and Sabonis, right? I think I'm comfortable talking about him as a Gasol type player now, right? And like Pau Gasol at his peak, I mean, yeah, I think he was good enough to drive a franchise. Like I don't think people remember how good Pau Gasol was.
No, it was awesome. Those couple Lakers title teams. He was clearly the second best player, and there were probably moments where we don't want to have that discussion where he might have been like their
finals MVP. Yeah, might have to revisit that 2009 one. No, you're right. Listen, that's what he was. That's exactly what he was. And the Rockets were at one point considering trading for him before, the NBA came in and canceled that trade, whatever, right? Like, because they thought that he could be the building block piece. And it's ironic, like now that they have someone who could be conceivably the second coming of that kind of guy. And I'm wondering, like, would this be more obvious if he was like 2 inches taller, or if he was the 6th overall pick in the draft versus the 16th overall pick in the draft, right? Like, because we are kind of adjusting to this data on the fly, right? This is all basically new data for us. How long did it take for us to get there with not Sengun, with Jokic, right? Like probably his first MVP season. It's like, oh, he can be the best player on a championship team. That's probably
people that still didn't even believe it then, and so it's
But I would say like that's probably when we first like. I think with Sengun, we probably have to get to a point where it's like a reasonable thing to say this. Maybe his first All-Star game, right? Because like now that we have the outline of Jokic, you don't have to go for the MVP. You don't have to wait to that point.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe when Sengun makes his first All-Star game, we can start talking about it more like openly. But I'm with you, man. Like I'm totally with you. I think he should be their North Star as of right now, right? Like until someone takes it from him, he's the guy, and you don't have any viable path to getting another top pick unless Brooklyn craters, right? Which it doesn't seem like they're going to be. It seems like they're going to fight that at every cause, right? So like, I think as of right now, I would be considering like they're right now they have Oladipo in house, right? And they have that contract ready to trade. It seems like they want to make a move. And I think the reason they're doing that is because they want another contract that they can acquire that's signed to multiple years, not just this year, next year, so that when the trade becomes available, when the star trade becomes available, they want to be ready, right? Like because like kind of where they were with KPJ when they had that contract in house, right? They want to be able to flip Oladipo for like a Malcolm Brogdon or something like that, and then when let's say this summer or next trade deadline, if a star that you feel can fit into your core becomes available, you're ready to pounce on it. I think that's kind of where the Rockets go at this trade deadline. I think they're going to move Oladipo and like 2 second rounders or maybe even a first. I don't know if they're willing to touch those Brooklyn first, but maybe the 2 second rounders. And I think they're going to go after like a Malcolm Brogdon type. And that may not sound that exciting to you, but it is exciting in that once you get that Brogdon type in house, you'll have Brogdon, you'll have Landale, you'll have Jeff Green, you'll have Tate, and that's enough. That's enough money to go get the star, right? Along with your pick capital from Brooklyn. Mm-hmm. Perhaps maybe you got to trade, maybe a Cam Whitmore in there, maybe a Jabari Smith in there, whatever you're willing to move, right? You got to that might be enough to get the star player trade moving, right? Like I think that's kind of where I'm at. Like organizationally, I'm viewing Sengun as the North Star, and I'm willing to sacrifice assets if it helps me get to a place where I can build around him.
I do wonder though, like just because of the infrastructure that's already in place, where Amen Thompson when he's healthy, the pick equity they have invested in him. Not so worried about Jabari Smith Jr. looking at the offense, but the equity they have in Jalen Green, and now you have brought Fred VanVleet into the fold. Does that cap like how much you're going to steer into the Sengun experience on all? Like he's averaging fewer touches per game this year than last year, more minutes overall. Like I know the effectiveness is just there. And so I'm curious if that not inhibits what they're able to do, but changes the way that they're going to build out the rest of this roster. Because when I'm just naming all those guys, if Sengun is your North Star, like what is then the ideal star that you're looking to go out and get? And then because of the quote unquote good talent or like high prospects they already have in place, it's invariably then going to replace one or two of those guys. If you're saying Sengun's off limits and you have Amen Thompson, you have Jabari Smith Jr., and you have Jalen Green, like there's only one other spot technically on a 5-man lineup. And like you still have Tari, Eason here and Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks. It's like, what is the type of player? And I know we had this discussion over the offseason, but now that we know Sengun is this good, but now that you also know what the Rockets are capable of so far, how does that impact the archetype of player, or even not even star, but player that you're going to go after?
Yeah, I mean, I think we ended that podcast where we were ranking guys like who's going to go. I want someone to go grab the mantle this year, right? Feels like Sengun's done that, right? Like he did that pretty damn quickly, but like that goal has been accomplished for the Rockets this season, right? So I think it is productive to have this conversation about like, how the Rockets choose to go about building around him if he's the guy. Listen, I think the only two untouchables for me are Jalen and Sengun. right? And I know what that means, right? And people might be like, "You're really willing to put Amen Thompson on the table?" Yeah, I think I am. You're really willing to put Jabari? Yeah, I think I
Well,
am.
look, I
Right?
don't
Like,
mean to, and I mean, this might be a whole separate discussion. Is like, how does what's happening right now impact the way that they're going to use Amen Thompson once he comes back? Like, if they're going to be a little bit worried about giving a rookie X amount of reps is going to hurt what they're doing. Like, there were some promising lineups they rolled him out in that were just, they were kind of defensive monsters at one point, so they could still lean into that. But like, if you have a chance as a Rockets team, if we fast forward 2 to 3 weeks and they're still at this pace, not to the point where they're just not losing any games, but they're still in the thick of things. And you look, if you had the opportunity, this might be a good, because you mentioned Brooklyn, you're sending them back Amen Thompson, maybe some of their picks, and getting Mikal Bridges. Like, if Brooklyn decided to pull the plug, they have the Ben Simmons injury they're dealing with. Nick Claxton's going to be a free agent. He had already missed some time this year. It doesn't seem like they're headed down that path. Like, that's a player who makes so much sense alongside not just Alperen Sengun and Jalen Green, but if you're going to end up keeping Fred VanVleet as part of that, and even Dillon Brooks, like, Mikal Bridges makes all the sense in the world.
yeah, I think that's kind of the type of player you would chase, right? The wingy guy, right? Like, because you have your guard, you have your big. I think you go for the wing. I think that's the kind of guy, Mikal Bridges, maybe your OG Anunoby. Like, I think Anunoby might be a little bit like low on the spectrum, where I'm not going to trade like a high end asset for OG Anunoby.
Picks
I might
for
trade,
sure. Like, you could give up but like, in terms of player equity, I wouldn't.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he is interesting in Houston just because he might want to dribble a lot, but with the players that they have and the spacing that they can apparently create right now, like, they don't need him to dribble a lot. But I'm with you in the sense that, especially with free agency coming up, I'm not, I'd be even, I mean, this is just Galaxy bringing it, but I'd be a little bit reluctant to give up Tari Eason for him, knowing what OG Anunoby is going to make in his next contract.
No, I'm with you. I'm at that point, right, where it's like I would be very selective on the guy I would trade for, right? Because I have the luxury now. I have the luxury to be selective.
Good point.
And I don't know, like it's tough because there isn't like a youngish, awesome wing out there, right? Like that a team's willing to trade, right? Scotty Barnes is out there, but they're not trading Scotty Barnes, right?
Right.
Like
Those players also just don't. It's always like, you're entering the Damian Lillard phase of your, maybe a little bit earlier than that. But even Anthony Davis was sort of like an anomaly where it's like 26, 27 is like when there might become available. And even by that standards, like, there's not that, there doesn't appear to be that wing out there right now.
Yeah, maybe Pascal, but like Pascal's an expiring contract, right? So I'm not trading
him next to Sengun. That would be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean but then you're pretty much talking about giving up Jabari, right? Like at that point,
and then you're reuniting Fred VanVleet and Siakam, which isn't the end of the world, but
that might be something to explore in the offseason when you can sign him to a multi-year deal, right? Like a sign and trade multi-year deal type thing, right? With the Raptors, that might be something to explore at that point. But in general, like, I'm looking, like, Giddey, like I don't think Giddey's someone you want to go trade for, right? Like, he doesn't really exactly make a lot of sense here. Like, it's tough. It's tough. I'm like Ingram, like I don't know.
I don't know. The ball's been sticking with him in New Orleans this year, so I wouldn't want that on. I mean, he'd be, in theory, if he made Udoka and get him to sort of change the way that he plays a little bit on offense, that'd be an interesting flyer. But he doesn't seem like the caliber of player, because it's those weird where it's like, I could see OG Anunoby being traded in a package that doesn't cost you the farm. Like, maybe it costs you a bunch of pick equity, but Brandon Ingram feels like the type of player that, along the Zach LaVine lines, where it's going to cost you too much real stuff to justify it for a team where Zach LaVine or Brandon Ingram wouldn't necessarily just be the finishing piece.
I just thought of the guy. I can't believe we didn't talk Jalen Brown.
Yeah, I mean, the relationship with Ime Udoka, but that contract and just
it's a rough contract, but that gives you some leverage. Maybe you don't have to give as much premium stuff up.
I think what gets awkward there is because Boston is not going to trade you. There'd be a third team involved because Boston, I guess, immediately is planning on taking the assets Houston's giving them and rerouting it for someone else. Because if you were to move Jalen Green, which he can't even be moved this season, but if you ever got to that point, you're still going to have Jason Tatum and probably at least one of Kristaps or Drew Holiday. And so your timeline is still now.
Yeah, it's a little funky. There's also door number 2, which we can end on. Like, hold on. Let me read this out.
Paul George wanting to request out from the Clippers because he's not going to get the ball enough.
Alperen Sengun, Jalen Green, Jabari Smith, Tari Eason, Alperen Thompson, Cam Whitmore. Is there a viable path there with just keeping like you're not gonna be financially, you're not gonna be able to keep all those guys, right? You're gonna have to pick and choose. But just staying the path, is there a viable do you think that's a smart way to go about it?
I don't know. I feel like we don't have nearly enough. We definitely don't have enough information on Cam Whitmore, but we don't have nearly enough information to me on Jabari Smith or Amen Thompson, who's only played in a couple games this year. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think I probably wouldn't go that route. I think you get to a point where it becomes so hard where you're reaching a stage where all these guys will eventually need new contracts. It's not just about affording them. It's about them wanting to. We've seen these. Look at what happened with the Warriors, like with Kuminga wanting to stand out because he knew that he was going to be extension eligible after this year. What even happened with Jordan Poole, even after he got paid. And so it's like when you're at that early stage of your career, it's just so much harder, it feels like, to develop off of one another into, like hitting your full ceiling. And maybe, I mean, that would be very Oklahoma City of them, but Oklahoma City is mostly the exception. Like these teams, they always have one or two homegrown players, but even the Nuggets, like you start to pick and choose. Like they chose between Yusuf Nurkic and Jokic, and they started breaking up players where it was, Will Barton used to be good and Gary Harris was really important to them, but they included him in the Aaron Gordon trade. Anyway, it feels like at some point they'll have to track towards that decision. And I just, again, this might be a bad answer just because if we knew what Amen Thompson's ceiling was going to be in this league, you could probably make a call. Well, then maybe it makes sense to stay together. But my bet would be like the fact that, like, if you might be good now because you went out and got these other veterans already in Dillon Brooks and Jeff Green and Fred VanVleet, and because Tari Eason's been around for a minute and you already knew he was good, and Alperen Sengun's this good already, it might put you on a faster timeline to where looking at Jabari Smith and Amen Thompson specifically, are you moving too fast for them to help you in the way that you need them to help you, or for you to be patient enough for them to help you in the way they need to help you?
Also, Dillon Brooks gives you some leverage, right? Because so when some of these guys come up, right? Like specifically the wings, like Jabari, Tari, when they come up, it's like, yeah, I'm willing to walk away because like I have Dillon Brooks locked up for a 4-year contract, right? Or 3 more years next, at this point this summer, right? It's like it gives you some wiggle room. It's like this is kind of our cheap option, right? Just staying with Dillon Brooks and letting this guy walk away, right? Like there's also like just door number 3, just kicking the can down the road, right? Just like, right now it's just fun. Let's just let it be fun for a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely don't need to do anything this season. Like you could just see where this pans out.
Yeah. They're probably going to do something this season to keep that option open. Just the OD, because they want to be a mid-level exception team. They want to be an over-the-cap team. And to do that, they need to get a contract that's extended to next summer. And the only way to do that is basically trading Oladipo. So what they do there, with the kind of player they get there, I'm guessing like Brogdon just makes so much sense for them, right? Like just like not only as like a contract, it's just like as a player to fill in like holes for them off the bench. Like he makes a lot of sense to me as a player to go target. But someone like that, just like another shooter, another defender, like someone like that off the bench that can just plug in some holes for you and also be that contract. I think that's kind of what I'm expecting moves for them this season. I know you have a hard hour at
I will say, you know what name you could keep an eye on?
Sure.
And it would be, I think this is an after this season thing, and he'd be super interesting here. And I guess it does mean you're punting on Jabari, but Jaren Jackson Jr.
Yeah, the guy that he gets compared to a lot, right? That's that is an interesting name, especially if Memphis. I hope it doesn't go this way because I do know some people in Memphis and I want them to have their fun team, right? But like if they can't get their stuff together soon, like
are you going to pay? Like, what if Jaren Jackson Jr. qualifies for the Supermax and it's like you've already paid John Morant, you paid Desmond Bane.
He's going to win Defensive Player of the Year, right? Or third team All NBA or something.
Yeah, I mean he already won Defensive Player of the Year, so it's not outside. I mean, this year it's not happening because their defense has been not great.
Yeah.
So, but that would just be like
he already qualifies then. Yeah.
I'm not sure because I think you need to do it in like 2 of the 3 seasons. I'm not sure if the extension rules change, but like he could absolutely make an All NBA team. So like that's something that, I mean, I guess they got rid of positions, but again, it could just come to a head where it's the Grizzlies are kind of looking at their future, and if this season goes off the rails, it's oh, okay, Jaren Jackson Jr. has 2 guaranteed years left on his deal. That's when you're going to have to start thinking about these things, these next contracts. And so that was just a name, like just someone I would monitor.
No, it's definitely someone to monitor. I think the Brown one is something that's probably like, if I were to rank this in terms of likelihood, like the Brown one just seems like it's like, oh, of course that's gonna happen, right? But I don't know like if Boston wants to go there anytime soon. But like we're like how many years in Tatum Brown are we, like 3 or 4? And that's kind of the point where like if you're not gonna win a title or like you know make the finals and like keep everyone happy, like in the next 1 or 2 years, it's probably gonna get shaken up. Maybe not broken up, but shaken up.
Yeah, I
Because
mean,
they
I
have
think it
enough
was
good
7
players.
years into the Brown Tatum pairing, if I'm not
7.
mistaken.
My God. How long I've
So,
been watching basketball, man. It's
and also
no.
just with the new rules, and maybe it's not an immediate thing, but like let's say the off season of 2025, where it's okay, now we're really reconciling having all these big deals in our books as Boston. That's where the Jalen Brown stuff could become more of a, like, even more. I'm not ruling it out like in the forthcoming summer. Really, a lot just depends. The Celtics have looked great by and large. Jalen Brown has probably struggled relative to the rest of that team, but yeah, I mean, he feels like the no-brainer one. I just kind of feel like, I don't know.
It's a lot of money. It's a lot
It's a
of
lot of
money.
money for a player where I feel like he's a very good player. I don't know if there's the upside for him to be more than he is now. And so when you're kind of looking at how limited he can be as a playmaker, or the predictability that he can sometimes give you on drives, not as a scorer, but as a passer, and then the turnovers and the handle stuff, it just, I mean, you look into it if he became available, but that's also just so far down the road.
No, 100%, 100%. Like, and Jalen would have to be a much better. Jalen would basically have to become a point guard, right? At that point, he'd have to be the lead ball handler, um, and that's gonna take a long time. And maybe by 2025, two things happen: like Jalen Brown becomes the cheap option because your roster's so expensive, and Jalen Green is like a point guard at that point. Like maybe both those things happen by 2025. We'll see. In any case, it was fun talking through some of this stuff with you. We're in a new world with the Rockets. Finally, I'm excited. Watching the Rockets no longer feels like homework. It feels like fun. It feels like watching like basketball, which is great. You can tell the people where we can follow you on social media and find your work.
Yeah, they can follow me, my name, basically everywhere at Dan Favale, Favale, and they can also find me at Bleacher Report and the Hardwood Knocks podcast, spelled exactly as it sounds. We cover the entire NBA at large, including this fun team.
Yeah. Thanks so much for coming on, Dan.